The dust-coated streets of Willow Creek, Arizona, had never been kind to Elizabeth Winters, but the day the town council banished her from the only home she'd ever known was the cruelest cut of all. A woman who refuses to perform her Christian duty to feed God's hungry children is no woman we want in our town, declared Mayor Thompson, his jowls quivering with self-righteous indignation as the assembly hall erupted in angry murmurs. The year was 1878, and Elizabeth stood tall despite the tears threatening to spill from her deep brown eyes. The offense that had earned her exile was simple. She had refused to cook for a group of strangers who had demanded food at her small homestead while her father lay dying inside. These weren't ordinary travelers seeking hospitality, they were drunk, belligerent men who had frightened her with their lewd comments and wandering eyes. When she'd barred the door against them, they'd return to town with tales of her unwomanly behavior and selfish heart. "You have until sundown tomorrow to gather your belongings and leave Willow Creek," the mayor continued, banging his gavel with finality. "Any who offer you shelter will face similar consequences." That night, Elizabeth packed what little she owned into her father's old wagon. Her mother had passed when she was just 12, and her father's recent death from consumption had left her alone at 22. The small homestead where she'd grown up would be claimed by the bank. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, only the skills her parents had taught her: reading, writing, and the domestic arts that were now, ironically, the source of her banishment. As dawn broke, Elizabeth hitched her father's aging mare to the wagon. She took one last look at the simple wooden cross marking her father's fresh grave behind the cabin. "I will make you proud, Pa," she whispered, touching the rough wood. Somehow, the spring sun was barely peeking over the eastern hills as Elizabeth drove her wagon out of town. A few early risers stopped to watch her pass, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with judgment. She kept her gaze forward, her spine straight, refusing to show them the devastation that threatened to overwhelm her. She had only a vague plan to head north toward the mining town of Silver Springs, where she'd heard a woman might find honest work. With $20 sewn into her skirt hem, a week's worth of provisions, and her mother's silver locket around her neck, Elizabeth Winters left behind the only world she knew. The journey was harder than she'd anticipated. The spring rains had turned parts of the trail to mud, forcing her to navigate carefully to avoid getting stuck. On the second night, camped beside a small creek, she heard wolves howling in the distance and slept with her father's old pistol clutched in her hand. Though she barely knew how to use it, by the fourth day her food supplies were dwindling, and the mare was showing signs of fatigue. The map she'd purchased in Willow Creek suggested she was still at least 3 days from Silver Springs. That afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered ominously on the horizon, Elizabeth spotted a small ranch nestled in a valley below the trail. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could make out a corral with several horses. Her instinct was to avoid it. Strangers had caused her nothing but trouble, but the darkening sky and the increasingly labored breathing of her mare forced her hand. She guided the wagon down the slope toward the ranch, her heart pounding. As she approached, a tall man emerged from the barn, watching her arrival with wary eyes. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher: dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Elizabeth pulled the wagon to a halt a respectful distance away. "Hello," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was hoping I might water my horse before the storm hits." The man approached slowly, one hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. As he drew nearer, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a weathered face that spoke of life spent outdoors. His eyes were a startling shade of green against his tanned skin. "Where are you headed, miss?" he asked, his voice deep but not unfriendly. "Silver Springs," Elizabeth replied, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. "I'm hoping to find work there." The The man glanced at her worn mare, then up at the rapidly darkening sky. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated the moment. "That storm's going to be a bad one," he said, "and your horse looks about done in. You're welcome to shelter in my barn until it passes." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by wariness. "I don't wish to impose. It's no imposition. I'm Ethan Keller." He extended a hand, then seemed to think better of it, noticing her gloved hands gripping the reins tightly. "Elizabeth Winters," she replied, nodding politely. "Well, Miss Winters, let's get your mare settled before the heavens open up." True to Ethan's prediction, the storm broke with spectacular fury just as they led the mare into the barn. Rain pounded on the roof as lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that made Elizabeth jump despite herself. "Your mare needs rest," Ethan observed as they unhitched her. "At least a day, maybe two." Elizabeth bit her lip, calculating her dwindling supplies and the delay this would cause. "I can't afford to stay that long." "You can't afford not to," he countered, stroking the mare's neck. "She'll collapse if you push her further today." As if to prove his point, the mare sank to her knees in the straw, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I have money," Elizabeth said, reaching for the hidden pocket in her skirt. "I can pay you for feed and shelter." Ethan waved away her offer. "Keep your money." "I don't take payment from travelers in need." Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face strong-jawed, with the shadow of a beard and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "You can stay in the house," he continued. "I've got a spare room." "The barn will be fine," she replied quickly, alarmed at the suggestion of staying in a strange man's house. Something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "As you wish. There's a small tack room with a cot. It's not much, but it's dry." He showed her to the room, a clean, sparse space with a narrow cot, a small table, and a lantern. "I'll bring you some food from the house," he said, turning to leave. "No," the word burst from Elizabeth with unexpected force, stopping him in his tracks. "I mean I can cook for myself." "For both of us, if you'll allow me use of your kitchen." Ethan studied her for a moment, puzzled by her reaction. "That's not necessary." "I insist," she said firmly. "If I'm to stay here, I should earn my keep." After a pause, he nodded. "All right, kitchen's yours whenever you're ready." "I'll be tending to the livestock." Elizabeth settled into the tack room, arranging her few belongings and listening to the rain drum on the roof. When the storm showed no signs of abating, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and dashed to the main house. The kitchen was simple but well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove, a pump for water, and basic staples stored in a pantry. Elizabeth set to work, finding a strange comfort in the familiar routine of preparing a meal. From Ethan's provisions, she made a hearty stew with dried beef, potatoes, and the few vegetables she found in his root cellar. When Ethan returned, soaked to the skin despite his oilskin coat, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with the aroma of cooking food. He stopped in the doorway, seemingly taken aback. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble," he said, hanging his dripping hat on a peg by the door. "It's no trouble," she replied, avoiding his gaze as she stirred the stew. "It's the least I can do." They ate at his kitchen table, the rain providing a steady backdrop to their meal. Ethan ate with the appreciation of a man accustomed to his own cooking, which Elizabeth suspected was basic at best. "This is the best meal I've had in months," he said, accepting a second helping. "You cook like this often?" Elizabeth tensed. "When needed." Sensing her discomfort, Ethan changed the subject, telling her about his ranch, the small herd of cattle he raised, the horses he bred and trained, the challenges of managing it all alone since his father had passed 2 years earlier. "What takes you to Silver Springs?" he asked eventually. "Family there?" "No," Elizabeth replied, her spoon pausing above her bowl. "No family. I'm hoping to find work, perhaps as a seamstress or shop girl." "Silver Springs is a rough town for a woman alone," Ethan commented, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm tougher than I look," she said with more confidence than she felt. Ethan seemed about to say something more but thought better of it. Instead, he helped her clear the dishes, insisting on washing them himself. "You cooked. Least I can do is clean up," he said when she protested. As he worked, Elizabeth noticed calluses on his hands, the kind that came from years of hard work. There was something reassuring about those hands, strong but careful as they handled the dishes. Later, as she prepared to return to the barn for the night, Ethan stopped her. "The storm's getting worse. Stay in the house. I'll take the barn." "I couldn't possibly. I insist," he said firmly. "I sleep out there half the time anyway, keeping an eye on new foals. The bed's already made up in the spare room." Too tired to argue further, Elizabeth relented. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed that she suspected had been made by Ethan's mother. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she listened to the storm rage outside and wondered what fate awaited her in Silver Springs. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Elizabeth rose early, determined to check on her mare and then prepare breakfast before Ethan awoke. But when she entered the kitchen, she found him already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup. "Your mare's doing better, but she's still not fit to travel." Elizabeth accepted the coffee with thanks. "I should continue on my journey tomorrow, regardless. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Ethan leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his mug. "There's no imposition. Actually, I could use some help around here if you're willing, in exchange for room and board until your mare recovers properly." Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. "What kind of help?" "Nothing untoward," he said quickly, a flush rising to his tan cheeks. "The house needs attention. Been neglecting it since Pa died, and with spring roundup coming, I'll be busy with the herd. Could use someone to keep things in order here." It was a sensible proposition. Her mare did need rest, and a few days' delay wouldn't change her prospects in Silver Springs significantly. Still, Elizabeth hesitated. Kindness from strangers often came with hidden costs. "Just until my mare recovers," she said finally, "and I'll earn my keep." Ethan's smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "That's settled then. I need to mend fences on the north pasture today. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Elizabeth replied, already planning what needed to be done in the neglected house. After Ethan left, Elizabeth spent the day cleaning. The house wasn't dirty so much as untended, a bachelor's home where functionality trumped comfort. She opened windows to air out rooms, washed linens, swept floors, and even discovered a small vegetable garden gone wild behind the house, which she began to reclaim from weeds. In the process, she learned more about Ethan Keller through the traces of his life. Books lined shelves in the small sitting room: history, agriculture, even a few novels. Framed daguerreotypes showed a younger Ethan with an older couple she presumed were his parents. Tools were meticulously organized in a shed beside the house. Everything spoke of a man who cared about his home but lacked the time or knowledge to maintain its domestic comforts. When Ethan returned in the late afternoon, he stopped in surprise at the threshold of his own home. Elizabeth had transformed the main room, removing layers of dust, arranging furniture more practically, and placing a small vase of wildflowers on the table. "I hope I haven't overstepped," she said uncertainly, seeing his stunned expression. "No, not at all," he replied, looking around with something like wonder. "It's just been a long time since this place felt like a home." Elizabeth blushed at the simple compliment. "Dinner will be ready soon. I found your mother's garden and salvaged what I could." They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine over the next few days. Ethan worked from dawn until dusk, preparing for the spring roundup, while Elizabeth revitalized the house and garden. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Elizabeth learned that Ethan had been born on this ranch, had gone to school in a town 20 miles away until he was 16, and had fought briefly in the final months of the Civil War despite being barely 18. He'd returned to help his father run the ranch, and had taken over entirely after his mother died of fever 5 years ago, and his father's health began to fail. In turn, Elizabeth shared carefully edited stories of her life in Willow Creek, her father's work as the town's only teacher, her mother's talent with a needle that Elizabeth had inherited, her own love of books and learning. She avoided mentioning her banishment, saying only that after her father's death, there was nothing left for her in Willow Creek. On the fourth day, as Elizabeth was hanging laundry in the spring sunshine, she saw a cloud of dust on the horizon that resolved into 3 riders approaching the ranch. She hurried inside, her heart pounding with irrational fear. Ethan was out checking the herd. She was alone. The riders pulled up in the yard, and Elizabeth watched from behind the curtain as they dismounted. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed. One of them, a bulky man with a bushy beard, pounded on the front door. "Hello, the house. Anybody home?" Elizabeth considered remaining silent, pretending the house was empty, but the laundry on the line and smoke from the chimney made that implausible. Gathering her courage, she opened the door but stayed firmly on the threshold. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Can I help you?" The bearded man removed his hat, revealing a balding head. "Afternoon, madam. We're looking for Ethan Keller." "Mr. Keller is out checking his herd," Elizabeth replied coolly. "I expect him back before sunset." The 3 men exchanged glances. "Mind if we water our horses and wait?" asked the bearded one. "Been riding since dawn." Elizabeth's throat went dry. These men reminded her too much of the ones who had demanded her hospitality in Willow Creek. But this wasn't her home, and she had no right to turn away visitors to Ethan's ranch. "You may water your horses at the trough," she said stiffly. "Mr. Keller can attend to you when he returns." The bearded man's expression hardened. "It's mighty hot out here, madam. We'd appreciate some coffee, maybe something to eat while we wait." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Elizabeth replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The kitchen is not available to visitors in Mr. Keller's absence." The second man, tall and lanky with a scar running down one cheek, stepped forward. "That ain't very hospitable, miss. A man expects certain courtesies out here on the frontier." "I am not here to serve you," Elizabeth said firmly. "You may water your horses and wait in the shade of that oak tree. Mr. Keller will return soon." The third man, who had remained silent until now, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mighty high and mighty for a woman alone, ain't she, boys? Maybe we ought to teach her some manners." Elizabeth's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around her father's small pistol. "I suggest you step back, sir." The tension was broken by the sound of hoofbeats. All 4 of them turned to see Ethan riding hard toward the house, his expression grim as he took in the scene. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Something I can help you with." The bearded man turned from Elizabeth with obvious reluctance. "Keller, just stopping by to talk business. Your woman here wasn't too keen on offering us any hospitality." "She's not my woman, she's my guest," Ethan corrected, his voice deceptively mild. "And she doesn't cook for strangers." "Neither do I, as it happens. State your business or move along." The atmosphere grew charged as the men assessed each other. Elizabeth remained in the doorway, her hand still in her pocket, watching the silent confrontation. "We represent Mr. James Carson," the bearded man finally said. "He's interested in purchasing your water rights to Clearwater Creek." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Creek's not for sale. I told Carson that last month." "He's prepared to make a generous offer," the scarred man interjected. "Don't care how generous it is. The answer's still no." Ethan's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Now, you've had your answer. Time for you to move on." For a tense moment, Elizabeth thought the men might refuse. The bearded man's hand twitched toward his gun, but the third man placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Carson won't be happy," the bearded man growled. "That's between Carson and his maker," Ethan replied evenly. "Good day, gentlemen." With obvious reluctance, the men remounted their horses. The bearded one paused, looking directly at Elizabeth. "Mighty pretty hands you got there, madam." Shame to waste them not cooking for deserving men, Ethan stepped forward, his expression darkening. "That's enough. Ride out, now." With muttered curses, the 3 men spurred their horses and rode away. Elizabeth watched them go, her knees suddenly weak with relief. Ethan turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right? Did they threaten you before I arrived?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who is James Carson?" Ethan's jaw tightened, cattle baron with land to the east. He's been trying to buy up water rights all over the territory. Without access to Clearwater Creek, my ranch would be worthless. He glanced in the direction the men had gone. I don't think they'll be back today, but they might return. Carson doesn't take no for an answer. Elizabeth nodded, understanding the implication. I should check on dinner, she said, needing a moment to compose herself. In the kitchen, she stirred the stew she'd prepared earlier, her hands still trembling slightly. The encounter had brought back painful memories of her last days in Willow Creek, the same entitlement, the same threat underlying the demand for service. Ethan entered the kitchen quietly, pouring himself a cup of coffee. I'm sorry about that, he said. Should have warned you Carson might send men around. It's not your fault, Elizabeth replied, keeping her back to him as she worked. I'm just not comfortable serving strange men. There was a long pause. May I ask why? Ethan's voice was gentle, without a hint of judgment. Elizabeth stilled, spoon in hand, considering how much to reveal. The weight of her secret pressed on her, and suddenly she longed to share it with someone who might understand. In Willow Creek, she began slowly, some men came to our homestead demanding food and shelter while my father was dying. They were inappropriate. I refused them. She took a deep breath. The town council banished me for it. Said a woman who wouldn't perform her Christian duty to feed travelers had no place in their community. She heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath, but couldn't bring herself to look at him. That's why I'm going to Silver Springs. I have nowhere else to go. Warm hands settled gently on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Ethan's green eyes were dark with anger, but it wasn't directed at her. Those men were wrong, Elizabeth. The town council was wrong. His hands slid down to take hers, calloused thumbs brushing across her knuckles. These hands, they're not meant for serving just anyone who demands it. They're yours to use as you choose, to work when you want, to create what you wish. Elizabeth stared at him, something unfurling in her chest, a warmth she'd almost forgotten could exist. Save your hands for those who deserve them, Ethan continued softly. Save them for people who respect you, who earn your care. His voice dropped even lower. Save them for me if you'd like. The simple sincerity in his words brought tears to Elizabeth's eyes. No one had ever suggested that her service should be earned rather than demanded, that her skills were gifts to be appreciated rather than duties to be enforced. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Ethan released her hands gently. You don't need to say anything. Just know that while you're here, you cook because you choose to, not because anyone expects it of you. He stepped back, giving her space. I need to check on the horses. Take your time with dinner, or don't make it at all if you'd rather not. There's cold ham in the pantry. After he left, Elizabeth stood motionless in the kitchen, her mind whirling. In just a few sentences, Ethan Keller had upended her understanding of her place in the world. The idea that her service was valuable, that it should be freely given rather than extracted, was revolutionary. That night, as they ate the stew she had chosen to finish preparing, their conversation was different, deeper, more personal. Elizabeth found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone, about her dreams of someday having her own millinery shop, of creating beautiful things with her hands that people would value. Ethan listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. As the evening wore on, Elizabeth realized she was experiencing something entirely new, being truly seen for herself, not merely as a daughter or a woman with domestic duties to fulfill. In the days that followed, their connection deepened. Elizabeth's mare recovered her strength, but neither of them mentioned her departure for Silver Springs. Instead, they established a comfortable partnership. Elizabeth took charge of the house and garden, finding satisfaction in creating a home, while Ethan managed the ranch work, occasionally with Elizabeth's help when an extra pair of hands was needed. One evening, about 2 weeks after Elizabeth's arrival, Ethan returned from town with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Got something for you," he said, uncharacteristically shy as he placed it on the table. Elizabeth unwrapped it to find several yards of beautiful blue calico fabric, along with thread, buttons, and trim. She looked up at him in surprise. "You mentioned wanting to make a new dress," he explained, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thought you might like this." The shopkeeper's wife said it would suit your coloring. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Elizabeth ran her fingers over the soft fabric. It's beautiful, Ethan, thank you. There's something else, he added, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather-bound book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Noticed you reading my old books. Thought you might enjoy something new. Elizabeth took the book, overwhelmed by the personal nature of his gifts. They showed that he had been paying attention, that he cared about her interests and desires. I don't know what to say, she murmured, echoing her words from days earlier. Ethan smiled, that dimple appearing in his cheek. You could say you'll stay a while longer. The mare's recovered, but… Well, I've grown accustomed to your company. Elizabeth's heart fluttered. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Keller? I'm offering you a place, Elizabeth. Whatever you want to call it. The house comes alive when you're in it. His green eyes held her steadily. I come alive when you're in it. The naked honesty in his voice stole her breath. This wasn't a man demanding her service or claiming ownership. This was a man offering partnership, acknowledging what she brought to his life and home. I'll stay, she said softly. For now. The smile that lit his face was worth any uncertainty about her future. Spring blossomed into early summer. Elizabeth settled into life at the ranch, finding unexpected joy in the rhythm of days marked by honest work and quiet evenings. She sewed her new dress, planted a larger vegetable garden, and even learned to ride one of Ethan's gentler horses, discovering a freedom in galloping across the meadows that she had never known before. Ethan began teaching her about the ranch operations, how to judge when a calf was healthy, how to predict weather from cloud patterns, how to manage the accounts in his leather-bound ledger. It became clear that he wasn't just allowing her to stay, he was inviting her into every aspect of his life. Their relationship evolved gradually, built on mutual respect and growing affection. The first time Ethan kissed her was on a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The touch of his lips on hers was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Elizabeth found herself leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. When they parted, Ethan cupped her face with one calloused hand. I'm falling in love with you, Elizabeth Winters, he said simply. I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Elizabeth covered his hand with her own. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, but of believing this can last. Good things have a way of being taken from me. Not this time, he promised. Not if I have any say in it. Their courtship blossomed throughout the summer. Ethan was unfailingly respectful of Elizabeth's boundaries, never presuming upon their growing closeness. They worked side by side during the day and shared increasingly intimate conversations in the evenings. Elizabeth moved from the spare room into a small cabin Ethan had built for a ranch hand he'd once employed, maintaining propriety while staying close. News of Carson's continued interest in the water rights cast occasional shadows over their happiness. The cattle baron had acquired several neighboring properties and was reportedly furious at Ethan's continued refusal to sell. Twice more, men came to the ranch with offers, each time leaving with thinly veiled threats when Ethan turned them down. Why not sell? Elizabeth asked one night after a particularly tense encounter. We could move somewhere else, start fresh. Ethan shook his head, his expression resolute. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather dug that well by hand. My father built this house for my mother. My sweat and blood are in every acre. He took her hand. Besides, if I sell to Carson, he'll control all the water for miles around. The small ranchers who depend on access to Clearwater Creek downstream would be at his mercy. Elizabeth nodded, understanding his principles even as she worried about the consequences. In late July, disaster struck. Elizabeth was alone at the ranch, Ethan having ridden out at dawn to help a neighboring rancher with a difficult calving, when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of the north pasture. Heart racing, she saddled Ethan's most reliable horse and rode toward the billowing black cloud. The sight that met her eyes was devastating. The dry summer grass was ablaze, flames spreading rapidly toward the main ranch buildings. The wind was driving the fire straight toward the wooden barn and house. Without immediate action, everything would be lost. Elizabeth rode back to the ranch at a gallop, her mind racing. The well near the house couldn't provide enough water to fight a fire of this size. Her only hope was to create a fire break a gap the flames couldn't jump. Working with frantic speed, she hitched the plow horse to Ethan's smallest plow and began turning over the earth in a wide strip between the approaching fire and the buildings. The work was backbreaking, far harder than anything she had done before. The horse, sensing the danger, was skittish and difficult to control. Elizabeth's hands blistered and bled on the wooden handles of the plow, but she pressed on, desperate to save the home that had come to mean so much to her. As the fire drew nearer, the heat became intense, making it hard to breathe. Smoke stung Elizabeth's eyes and filled her lungs. The plow horse balked, refusing to go closer to the flames. With no choice left, Elizabeth unhitched him and sent him running toward safety, then grabbed a shovel and began widening the firebreak by hand. She lost track of time, aware only of the relentless advance of the flames and her own increasingly desperate efforts. When her legs finally gave out, she fell to her knees in the freshly turned earth, watching the fire approach the line she had created. For agonizing minutes, she waited, praying the break would be wide enough. The fire reached the edge of the turned soil, flared up as if gathering strength for a leap, and then, miraculously, began to die back, unable to cross the barrier of bare earth. Elizabeth collapsed fully then, overcome by exhaustion, smoke inhalation, and relief. She wasn't sure how long she lay there before strong arms lifted her. "Elizabeth, Elizabeth, can you hear me?" Ethan's voice was ragged with fear. She opened her eyes to find him kneeling beside her, his face streaked with soot. "The fire," she croaked, her throat raw from smoke. "Did it? It's contained. The men from the Circle B are helping put out the last of it." He stroked her face with trembling fingers. "My God, Elizabeth, when I saw the smoke and couldn't find you at the house. Couldn't let it burn," she whispered. "It's your home, our home." Something broke in Ethan's expression then. He gathered her carefully in his arms, mindful of her injuries, and carried her back to the ranch. The next few days passed in a blur of pain and recovery for Elizabeth. Her hands were badly blistered, her lungs irritated from the smoke. Ethan rarely left her side, tending to her with gentle care. The fire was deliberate, he told her on the third day, when she was strong enough to sit up in bed. Found evidence that someone set it at the north fence line. "Carson," Elizabeth said, not a question. Ethan nodded grimly. "Most likely, can't prove it though." "What will you do?" "Nothing, for now. Protect what's mine and wait." His gaze traveled to her bandaged hands. "I almost lost everything that matters because of this feud. I won't risk that again." As Elizabeth healed, their relationship deepened further. The shared ordeal seemed to have burned away any remaining hesitation between them. When Elizabeth was finally able to leave her bed, Ethan surprised her by asking her to accompany him to town. "There's something I need to do there," he said mysteriously. They rode in the wagon, Elizabeth still too weak for horseback. The small town of Pine Ridge was bustling with its usual Saturday activity. Ethan helped Elizabeth down from the wagon with special care for her healing hands, then led her not to the general store as she expected, but to the town's only church. Reverend Taylor was waiting for them on the steps, Bible in hand and a knowing smile on his face. "Ethan." Elizabeth looked at him questioningly. He took both her bandaged hands in his, mindful of her still healing blisters. "I had planned to court you properly for months to give you time to be certain, but life's too uncertain to wait for perfect moments." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Elizabeth Winters. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Elizabeth's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking you to marry me, today if you're willing." His green eyes searched her face anxiously. "I know it's sudden, but yes," Elizabeth interrupted, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ethan Keller." The ceremony was simple and brief, witnessed only by the Reverend's wife and the local shopkeeper who happened to be passing by. Elizabeth wore her blue calico dress, completed just before the fire, and Ethan wore his best shirt, freshly pressed for the occasion. They exchanged plain gold bands that Ethan had purchased weeks earlier, keeping them hidden as he waited for the right moment. "I promise to cherish and protect you," Ethan vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To honor your choices and respect your independence, to build a home with you where both of us can thrive." Elizabeth, moved beyond words, responded with vows of her own. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to share my strength with yours, to create with these hands a life we can both be proud of." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan sealed their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership and love. Their wedding night was spent in the small hotel in Pine Ridge, a luxury Ethan had arranged as a surprise. Despite her healing hands, Elizabeth found ways to express her love physically, discovering new dimensions to their connection as they learned each other's bodies with reverent care. "I never thought I would find this," she whispered in the darkness, her head resting on Ethan's chest. "Someone who sees me as I am and values me for it. I never thought I'd find someone strong enough to stand beside me through everything life might bring," he replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "You saved our home, Elizabeth. You saved me." They returned to the ranch the next day as husband and wife, facing their future together with confidence born of shared trials and deep affection. The threat from Carson remained, hovering on the horizon of their happiness. 2 weeks after the wedding, the cattle baron himself finally appeared at the ranch, accompanied by 4 armed men. Elizabeth was weeding the garden when they rode up, and she straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched them approach with trepidation. Ethan emerged from the barn, shotgun in hand, but pointed at the ground a warning rather than an immediate threat. James Carson was a large man with a florid face and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the dusty ranch yard. He dismounted with the awkward movements of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in a saddle. "Keller," he acknowledged, eyeing the shotgun warily. "Carson," Ethan replied evenly. "This is my wife, Elizabeth." Carson's gaze shifted to Elizabeth, a calculating look that made her skin crawl. "Madam," he said with a curt nod, "I understand congratulations are in order." "What do you want, Carson?" Ethan asked, stepping closer to Elizabeth. "Same thing I've always wanted, Clearwater Creek, name your price." "Not for sale, not now, not ever." Carson's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Keller. I own everything east of here now, all the way to the territorial border. You're an island in my sea." "Then I guess I'd better learn to swim," Ethan replied coolly. "The fire was just a taste," Carson said, dropping all pretense. "Things can get much worse for a small rancher all alone out here." Elizabeth stepped forward, her fear giving way to anger. "He's not alone." Carson looked her up and down dismissively. "A woman doesn't change the equation, Keller." "This one does," Ethan said, a note of pride in his voice. "She's the one who saved our ranch from your fire, single-handedly." Something shifted in Carson's expression, a flicker of doubt where there had been only arrogant certainty. "You have a week to reconsider my offer," he said finally. "After that, don't expect any mercy." "We don't want your mercy," Elizabeth replied before Ethan could speak, "and we don't fear your threats. This is our home and we'll defend it." Carson's face mottled with anger, but he seemed to think better of whatever he had planned to say. With a jerk of his head to his men, he remounted his horse. "1 week," he repeated, then spurred his horse and rode away, his men following close behind. When they were out of sight, Elizabeth's knees went weak. Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her. "That was quite a performance, Mrs. Keller," he said, a mix of pride and concern in his voice. "Not a performance," she replied shakily. "I meant every word. I won't be driven from another home by bullies." They spent the next week preparing for whatever might come. Ethan rode to neighboring ranches, speaking with other small landowners who had resisted Carson's attempts to buy them out. Elizabeth inventoried their supplies, considering how they would manage if they were cut off from town. The expected attack came not from Carson's men, but from the law itself. The territorial marshal arrived with papers claiming that Carson had filed for water rights based on a survey showing that the headwaters of Clearwater Creek originated on land he now owned. "This is ridiculous," Ethan exploded after reading the documents. "The creek starts in the hills on my property. It always has." "Survey says different," the marshal replied, uncomfortable but firm. "Court hearings set for next month in the territorial capital. Until then, you're enjoined from preventing Carson's men from accessing the creek anywhere on your property." After the marshal left, Ethan and Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, the legal papers spread before them. "He must have bribed the surveyor," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "There's no other explanation." Elizabeth studied the documents carefully. "The survey map is very specific about where the creek begins. We need to prove it's wrong." "How?" "Carson has the money to buy whatever testimony he needs. We need evidence no one can dispute," Elizabeth said slowly, an idea forming. "The original land grant to your grandfather, does it describe the boundaries in detail?" Ethan nodded. "Pa kept all those papers in his strongbox." They spent hours poring over yellowed documents, comparing the original land description with the new survey. The discrepancy was obvious once they overlaid the maps. Carson's surveyor had shifted the entire creek nearly a quarter-mile east, conveniently placing its source on Carson's newly acquired land. "This proves he's lying," Ethan said, hope kindling in his eyes. "It's a start," Elizabeth agreed. "But we need more, indisputable evidence that the creek begins where we say it does." The solution came from an unexpected source. The next day, as they were discussing how to proceed, a rider approached the ranch, one of the men who had accompanied Carson on his visit. Ethan met him in the yard, rifle in hand. "State your business." The man raised his hands to show he was unarmed. "Name's Fletcher. I work for Carson, but I'm here on my own account." "Why?" Elizabeth asked, joining Ethan. Fletcher shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "What Carson's doing ain't right. I signed on to help build a cattle empire, not to steal from honest folks." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document. "This is a copy of the original survey before Carson had it altered. Shows the creek starting right where you say it does." Ethan took the paper cautiously. "Why are you giving us this? My pa was a small rancher like you, lost everything to men like Carson." Fletcher glanced over his shoulder nervously. "I can't testify in court. Carson would ruin me, but that paper might help." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away. The document was exactly what they needed, proof of Carson's fraud. But as Ethan pointed out, it might not be enough on its own. "The court could claim this is the forgery, not Carson's version. We need the surveyor's testimony." "Or evidence that can't be disputed," Elizabeth insisted. They decided on a bold strategy. Using the original land grant, the true survey, and a camera borrowed from the town photographer, they would document the actual course of Clearwater Creek from its source to where it left Keller land. The expedition took 3 days. Ethan, Elizabeth, and 2 neighboring ranchers followed the creek to its source high in the hills, taking photographs at key points and noting precise locations. The work was exhausting, especially for Elizabeth, still not fully recovered from her injuries, but she insisted on being part of every step. On the 3rd day, as they photographed the creek's headwaters, a spring bubbling from rocks clearly within the boundaries of the Keller ranch, they heard horses approaching. Carson and 3 of his men crested the ridge above them. "Trespassing won't help your case, Keller," Carson called down. "This is my land now. We have evidence that proves otherwise," Elizabeth replied, gesturing to the camera. The actual source of Clearwater Creek, documented for the court to see. Carson's face contorted with rage. He drew his pistol. "Hand over that camera." "That would be unwise, Mr. Carson," came a new voice. Everyone turned to see the territorial marshal riding toward them, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Marshal Sullivan," Ethan acknowledged, surprised but relieved. "What brings you up here?" "Anonymous tip that there might be trouble at the headwaters today," Sullivan replied, his gaze fixed on Carson's drawn weapon. "Put that away, Carson, unless you want to add charges to the fraud allegations already being considered." "Fraud," Carson sputtered. What are you talking about? Sullivan dismounted, moving to examine the spring. Your surveyor confessed yesterday. Seems his conscience got the better of him after you paid him to falsify government documents. The color drained from Carson's face. He's lying. I never. Save it for the judge, Sullivan interrupted. For now, I'm here to inform you that all legal actions regarding water rights in this area are suspended pending investigation of criminal charges against you. Carson looked from the marshal to Ethan and Elizabeth, trapped and furious. For a moment, Elizabeth feared he might attempt something desperate. Instead, he holstered his pistol with a shaking hand. This isn't over, he growled. Actually, it is, Sullivan replied. You're under arrest, Carson. For attempted fraud, bribing a government official, and if I'm not mistaken, arson as well. As the deputies moved to take Carson into custody, Ethan pulled Elizabeth close, both of them watching in stunned silence as their nemesis was led away. Did you know about this? Elizabeth asked Sullivan once Carson was secured. The marshal shook his head. The surveyor came forward on his own, said someone convinced him to do the right thing. He glanced meaningfully in the direction Fletcher had gone days earlier. Justice works in mysterious ways sometimes. The legal battles dragged on for months, but with Carson in custody and the fraud exposed, the immediate threat to the Keller ranch was lifted. Life settled into a new rhythm for Ethan and Elizabeth, one of partnership in all things. In the spring of 1879, nearly a year after Elizabeth had first arrived at the ranch, she shared news that filled Ethan with joy. They were expecting a child. As her body changed to accommodate new life, Elizabeth often thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this place, how being banished from Willow Creek had ultimately led her to true happiness. You ever regret it? She asked Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Taking in a homeless woman with nothing to offer but her hands, Ethan smiled, the dimple appearing in his cheek as he pulled her closer. Those hands rebuilt my home, saved my ranch, and stole my heart. I'd say they offered quite a lot. Elizabeth leaned into his embrace, remembering his words from that day in the kitchen. Save your hands for me. She had, and in doing so, had found not just a home but a life beyond anything she could have imagined when she drove her wagon out of Willow Creek. In September, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a testament to what they had found in each other. As she cradled her child, Elizabeth looked up at Ethan standing beside the bed, his green eyes shining with tears of joy. I never thought I could be this happy, she whispered. When they forced me out of Willow Creek, I thought my life was over. It was just beginning, Ethan replied, sitting beside her and gently touching their daughter's tiny hand. And so is hers. 5 years later, the Keller ranch had prospered. With Carson convicted of multiple crimes and serving time in the territorial prison, his empire had been broken up. Ethan had purchased some of the adjacent land, expanding their holdings and securing even more of Clearwater Creek's watershed. Elizabeth had given birth to a son, Samuel, to join their daughter Hope. She had also established a small millinery business, creating hats that were sought after by women throughout the territory. Her hands, once demanded for menial service by strangers, now created beauty that was valued and respected. On the anniversary of their wedding, Ethan surprised Elizabeth with a letter. It came in the mail yesterday, he explained, handing her the envelope. Elizabeth recognized the Willow Creek postmark with a jolt of apprehension. Inside was a formal letter from the town council, acknowledging the regrettable misunderstanding that had led to her banishment and officially rescinding it. Reading between the lines, Elizabeth gathered that Willow Creek had fallen on hard times and was seeking to repair relationships with former residents. They want me back, she said, astonished. Do you want to go? Ethan asked quietly, even just to visit. Elizabeth looked around at the home they had built together, the comfortable house with children's toys scattered on the floor, the thriving garden visible through the window, the millinery workshop Ethan had constructed for her birthday. Then she looked at her husband, the man who had seen her value when others had seen only her utility. No, she said, crumpling the letter and tossing it into the fire. "Everything I need is right here." Ethan gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days together. When they parted, he took her hands in his, running his thumbs over the small scars left from the fire badges of courage that told the story of their life together. "These hands," he murmured, bringing them to his lips. "I'm so glad you saved them for me." Elizabeth smiled up at him, her heart full. From banishment to belonging, from survival to joy, the journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. Her hands had found their true purpose, not in serving those who demanded, but in building a life with someone who valued her for exactly who she was. As the sun set over their ranch, casting the land in golden light, Elizabeth Keller knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home at last, with the man who had taught her that true love was not about service but about partnership, not about duty but about choice. And she had chosen well.